This episode is brought to you by Hired.com. Searching for a new job can feel stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles that you don't actually want, and job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. Sometimes you go all the way through an interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary offer or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you. On Hired, you receive personalized interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about which opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Throughout the process, your dedicated talent advocate will have your back, providing unbiased career coaching to help you put your best foot forward with potential employers. Hired offers access to 4,000 plus innovative employers, including big brands such as Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. We help people find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let us know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance to us. That's why Hired hides your profile from your current and past employers. The best part is it's always free for you to find your next job on Hired, no exceptions. We pay you to get hired. Today's listeners can earn double our normal $1,000 hiring bonus by signing up with the show's link. That's right, earn $2,000 for finding your next chapter on Hired. Visit hired.com/reactnativeradio to learn more. This episode is brought to you by dailydrip.com. Daily Drip makes keeping up to date on programming skills easier. You already know how much time it takes to find good resources and learn new languages. What if the hard part of that was already done for you? Sign up for Daily Drip and pick a topic that you want to learn about. Want to learn React Native? How about Elm? Maybe you want to brush up on your CSS and HTML. Every weekday, you'll get a short video or reading delivered to you via email. The best part is it only takes 5 minutes a day. We have a special coupon code just for React Native Radio listeners. If you sign up using the coupon code RNRadio, all one word, you'll save $9 on your first month, which means you can try out the React Native topic for free. Don't forget to use the coupon code RNRadio to show support for our podcast. Make learning part of your daily routine with dailydrip.com. Hello and welcome to episode 49 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our panel we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey everybody.
Gant Laborde.
Hey friends.
And today our special guest is Bonnie Eisenman.
Good morning.
Hey Bonnie, and welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we basically asked you to come on because you were the author of a O'Reilly book, and it was basically the book that I bought when I was learning React Native. So you were super early into the whole React Native ecosystem, and you obviously picked it up very well. And I think it would be cool to kind of talk to you about how you learned React Native, what you did to learn it so quickly. Also kind of to hear about how the process of writing a book for such a new technology, was, and how that process went, and how you kind of kept up with API changes, or if you do keep up with API changes and stuff like that. So I guess before we kind of get into all that, can you kind of tell us about how you got into programming and then kind of how you got into React Native after that?
Sure. It is really awesome to hear that you had read the book when it came out. So I got into programming pretty early, I think the same way a lot of people do. I experimented with some web stuff early on as a kid. And then I majored in computer science in college. So followed a pretty straightforward path to being a software developer. And then at my last job, actually, I was at a startup called Codecademy, which is a coding education startup in New York City. And we were using React for all of the front end dev work. I joined the team actually the same week that everybody was learning React, which was a great time to join because everybody was new to everything. And I was at the conference and they announced React Native. And my first reaction to it, having done some mobile development before, was, oh my God, this sounds so wonderful. My previous experiences with mobile development had been pretty difficult, to be honest. There were a lot of things that were hard that felt like they shouldn't be hard, not just from the learning curve, but from the whole approach. Why do you have to duplicate your work on iOS and Android, all of that. So when the beta was released, I really just dug into React Native and was super impressed with it.
So do you work with React Native now?
No, actually. So I am at Twitter. I'm a software engineer on the back end on what we call the user service, which handles all reads and writes of user data. So I focus on distributed system stuff. I work in Scala. It's a pretty big change from JavaScript-based mobile dev.
So that's interesting. How did you become like someone that moved from like the front end to the back end, and at a company like Twitter? That's pretty impressive.
Thanks. So for me, I wrote the book while at my last job, and that was, a year-long, pretty intensive endeavor. And then around the same time, I was looking for my next gig, and I knew that there were problems that I thought were interesting, but I had never been exposed to before. And a lot of really interesting problems only show up at the scale of a large company like a Twitter or a Facebook or a Google, something on that size. And I had the opportunity to join this team here, and I was like, wow, it seems pretty rare that I would get to work on these kinds of problems. So I just sort of jumped at it.
So I guess going back to the book is called Learning React Native from O'Reilly. I guess for someone just getting into React Native, what can you kind of talk about to help someone become efficient at the framework at a short amount of time to actually be able to either get employed building React Native apps or build React Native apps to kind of like put in the App Store themselves?
Yes, that's a great question. I think the most important thing is that you should have a solid background in React, the normal React.js for web, plain JavaScript, not for mobile. You don't have to spend like months and months working on that, but you should be at least familiar with the component lifecycle, understand how state works and all of that. And that will enable you to get up to speed with React Native really quickly. And then after that, I would say just, try building some apps, see how it works, actually deploy them to the App Store, use them on a real phone, send them to your friends. One of the fantastic things about React Native is that it lowers the barrier to entry a lot. So once you overcome that initial hump of getting started, you can actually become productive in it really, really quickly. And from there, once you've understood what it takes to build out, your first app or two, then you can really focus on learning how to build really excellent, top-notch apps, learning about things like animation and performance and all of that. But for most people, I think the main thing is just get started. React Native makes it shockingly approachable to get into mobile dev.
Is there anything that you wish React Native had that you still seem to encounter or just see in the community? I know you're not using it on a daily basis, but is there anything that you're like, I really wish React Native just kind of picked up this issue or picked up this feature so it would all make our lives easier?
Yes, definitely. So I still do deal with React Native pretty frequently, just not at my day job. I still teach classes with it and things like that. And for me, there's a couple of big standouts there. One is Windows support and Linux support. So despite the fact that to develop iOS apps, you need to be using a Mac, there are a lot of people who want to use React Native on Windows or on Linux, and the support for that is still a little bit wonky. And it's not, a priority for the core team, understandably so, but that's something that I would really love to see improve a bit. I'm also really, really, really would love if the Navigator problem would settle out a little bit.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So routing and navigation in React Native, there's currently like 3 approaches that are built into the docs. And very frustratingly, the main contender right now, which for built-in Navigator support, the one that most people like the most, I think, is called Navigator Experimental. And it was merged to master under the title Navigator Experimental, which I think is frustratingly difficult, especially for newcomers to the framework, to grasp the fact that the thing that's called experimental is, in fact, one of your best candidates. So those are probably my 2 pet peeves.
I know Gant can probably speak a lot about the Microsoft thing because he's actually working with them right now trying to make that a better experience. But going back to the Navigator, I just kind of had a conversation over the weekend with a few people, and it looks like Navigator Experimental and X Navigation are going to be merged or something like that. And they're going to drop Navigator iOS and Navigator, and they're going to bring in like a brand new Navigator API or something like that. I don't know all the details, but I actually have a meeting today with Mike Grabowski, and I'm going to hopefully learn a lot more about that. But yeah, that is totally an issue. But I think hopefully next year, at the very beginning of the next year, and one of the next versions, that might be something that's actually taken care of, or at least that's the best of my understanding.
Right. Navigation is such a fundamental aspect. And I imagine it's the first thing, like you were saying, is that, if you want to get in there and just build your first app, there's going to be a pain point. And that pain point for most people is like, okay, now I want to put on my second screen, right? I want to click the button that says sign in, and I want to show a sign in screen. Well, I think that, it's a good point that the barrier to entry immediately shoots skyward when you click on there and there's 20 Stack Overflow pages saying, do not use what the last guy said. It will not work for you. This is a terrible decision. And, that's just not the introductory experience like you're getting from React Native all the way up until that point. So simple, so clear, so fundamental, and it works for you. And then you get to navigation. And, I'm really hoping, I agree. I hope that, X Navigator and everybody kind of work together. And at least we get something that's, like there are 3 or 4 libraries where people have agreed on certain paradigms, but they don't actually kind of fit together. And that actually brings up a good question I have for you. I was interested, speaking of paradigms, React is so, I guess, rooted in functional paradigm as well as, just procedural logic. If you want somebody who's getting new to it, exactly how much, and perhaps this can speak to your book, how much do you actually dig into those underlying concepts? Do you touch any OO or functional ideas when you're bringing somebody in for the first time?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, right? And figuring out how to teach somebody a new framework is always really hard. It's much more difficult with React Native because not only are you concerned about how do you program well in React, how do you structure a code base that includes Objective-C and Java and Swift and JavaScript, but also you have all of the mobile interaction patterns, you've got the functional way of thinking in React. There's a lot that you could introduce somebody to. Usually I err on the side of not going deep into the details of that. I assume that when it comes to coding paradigms and sort of design principles and patterns, that somebody is going to get their education for that somewhere else. There's already a ton of really good resources on how to program in general and how to structure your code in general. For a lot of new React Native developers, they're going to be getting this in the context of a team, whether it's at a workplace or with just other programmers who they're working with and getting it through code review. I think it's a lot to internalize if you've never encountered anything remotely functional before. And for a lot of people coming from a primarily web JavaScript background, React is new and scary in part because it requires you to think really differently. That being said, I think that it's actually not that bad of a leap, and a lot of people sort of pick it up the way you might pick up a new language without really realizing that you're internalizing bits of it. And I've seen most people tend to figure it out pretty quickly that, in React, components describe how they should render. You don't actually have to worry about the gritty mechanics of how that works.
Well said.
And Gant, while we have you on, and we were just talking kind of about Microsoft, can you kind of go over what you think the state of working with React Native and Windows is? Because I know you've been doing some stuff with that as of very recently.
Yeah, actually, that's funny. The whole platform, just abstraction, it's fantastic because I have to say, as a person who knows the cringe of when Microsoft is mentioned, they're killing it on the React front. They're doing a great job. They have, you've had several of the people on the show. Microsoft seems to have really invested a lot into React, to, I guess, everybody's surprise. And Eric Rosell is spending all of his time pushing forward, making React Native Windows work. There are major clients that are funding and pushing towards React Native projects. There are initiatives to really make that platform a first-class citizen, not so much to go into core, but to make core work well with what we're seeing now, this sort of cornucopia effect of all these different platforms that are trying to use this React mentality to bring this virtual DOM, this virtual sort of world towards a unified code base. And what's really cool about it is React Native, Ubuntu and Linux and fun stuff like that isn't going to get the same kind of funding and the same kind of sort of corporate push that React Native Windows gets, because there's a lot of people out there that make, their daily bread from exactly this kind of thing. So they're pushing behind that kind of success. and everybody's getting the benefit because this is happening in the open source world. So I love that people are actually kind of keeping an eye on it. And as long as core continues to evolve, and there's some really good conversations. I mean, you said later on you're going to be talking to Mike Grabowski.
Yeah.
He just merged some code. He reviewed some code this morning, considering Microsoft Windows. So he's like putting the initiative out there. And as long as everybody keeps doing that, platforms will become almost a separate entity. It won't just be, well, what will Facebook want next? Will they want iOS, Android, and X? It'll be more of what will the React community want next? And what will the React community go towards? So you've got Doug Lauder, who's pushing towards Apple TV. And then also, I know for a fact there's platform support pushes inside of Facebook itself. And as we're all kind of finding this neutral ground, because before, I mean, to be fair, when it was announced, it was iOS, and trust me, we're going to have Android working, right? So the corners that were cut and the technical debt that came along with hard coding platforms is definitely dissipating and being dissolved under the sort of watchful eye of Lacker and Martin. And what happens is, on the other side of that coin needs to be somebody else, grabbing that olive branch, right? And that's Microsoft, and that's other companies who like Mac. I haven't looked at some of the other ones, but I'd say like the one that's really kind of saying, give us this functionality is Microsoft. So that'll be the first one that sort of kind of jumps and builds that bridge right there. And I swear to you, every day there's commits going in on making this successful. So it's really, really cool. If you want to be involved in it, everybody knows about Reactiflux, the Discord channel. If you go to the platforms link in there, I know there's a million things in Reactiflux. There's that initiative, and I think it would work out great. Plus, oddly enough, there's the whole concept of React Native Web. And actually, I think that guy works at Twitter, Nicholas Gallagher.
Yeah, Nick Gallagher. The React Native Web project is really, really interesting to me, in part because it just seems like this strange snake eating its tail style thing of, well, we started with React for web, then React Native sort of abstracts the platform away, so now we're back on the web. And I think as of some months ago, right, the docs actually use React Native Web to render the example code.
Oh, wow, I did not know that. I know that Devin Abbott has that website, React Native Express, I believe, and you can go there to learn React Native. It's really good. But I think he uses that there as well. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I love the idea. The idea seems to be kind of breaking into its own piece because it's getting big enough to do that. And this is one of those moments. It's like putting the ship in the water. Like everybody's excited, and then hopefully it floats.
I was just going to say that it's really, really neat to hear about the Windows stuff coming out. And I agree. It's going to be the first really major platform push that I think we're going to see, other than, iOS and Android, which are baked in by Facebook, to really take off. Like, yeah, Ubuntu and React Native Web have been really interesting, but I don't think they've gotten nearly the same level of support and, production readiness. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Absolutely. And I think the floodgates will absolutely just bust wide open if you can promise the idea of 80% code reuse across 3 platforms with a good experience, because it just will make almost no sense to do it any other way unless you have some type of constraints as far as what your application needs that React Native cannot deliver. But I would say for most use cases, it would just make so much more sense if you can offer all 3 platforms. The push for both platforms already seems to be very promising and lucrative, and most people think it's a good value as far as choosing React Native. But once you add that 3rd platform, it'll just make even that much more sense. And I know I'm working with the company right now that just chose React Native as they're rebuilding their mobile app platform. And it's a very big company. And the reason they chose React Native is because they do need Windows, and they see what's going on with Windows. And that was the reason that they were not going to go with them before. But now that they see what's going on, they are able to invest quite a bit of money in rebuilding their application using React Native. So that's really, really, really promising to hear, Gant.
Yeah, and that's I'm not sure. That's the snowball forming, right? The more people who see it and jump on board, the bigger and the more powerful it ends up like becoming. And it's fantastic because sometimes I'll see a feature and I'm like, oh, this is great. I can knock this out. This was easy. But then sometimes it's kind of nice to have someone come along and say, oh, I'll knock this out. This is easy. And I'm like, good. I didn't have to do that.
So I'm kind of curious, Bonnie, as far as the book Learning React Native is concerned, like now that it's already out there, it's published and everything, do people like buy it and do they get like a digital copy as well? And how do you kind of keep up with the paperback copy? And if there is a digital copy, the digital copy as these APIs mature and change?
So that's been one of the biggest challenges of the project. I actually started writing the book before the public release of React Native, like back when it was still that really weird, only these couple hundred people could download it from GitHub.
Oh, wow.
Thing. Yeah. And then 2 weeks before the first draft was due, Android support came out.
Oh, wow.
So I spent those 2 weeks scrambling to add Android support to the manuscript and was astonished and really impressed, actually, because the way that launch was handled, I took my existing code samples, bumped the React Native version, and tried running them on Android, and almost all of them just worked, which was really crazy, right? Because nobody had known whether or not the whole cross-platform promise would actually bear out. But now that the book is released, so there's a paperback version, there's also an ebook version, and then there is the GitHub repository with the code samples. And the updates aren't happening as well as I would have liked, to be honest. So the way it works with O'Reilly is that if there's ever a future edition and you own the ebook, then you get the updated version for free. So that's very good. With the paperback version, of course, you can't really issue an update, although you can buy the combo paperback and ebook for like some nominal extra charge from O'Reilly directly. And then I had been trying to keep the GitHub repo up to date, but I found a huge amount of work to go through and update all of these small code samples with every React Native bump, because tracking down where the incompatibilities are between versions and doing the upgrades is actually, for me at least, it's a lot of very tedious work. So I honestly haven't been doing as good a job of that as I could be. Part of that is just that React Native doesn't jump major versions when there are breaking changes, which has made it more difficult to figure out when to invest the time to do that.
So welcome to the pain of I swear to you, and every podcast probably brings this up. Just the neck breaking speed of what's going on has this cost, and it's so funny because it's nice to hear that even in the teaching book you have to experience this. You've become my favorite story about it.
I'm glad to contribute that. Yeah, everyone I've talked to finds the pace of upgrades to be simultaneously like really great, right? It means that the framework is making progress, that we've got a bunch of new features and bug fixes that everyone desperately needed. But also it means that staying up to date is a major pain point for, I think, literally everyone I've talked to about React Native. And obviously it's hard to find that balance. The project is only less than 2 years old, right? I guess a year and a half since Android release dropped. So, it's still very, very young. I think anyone who's using React Native right now sort of expects that it's going to have a few rough edges still.
It truly is insane how fast they're moving. And I also, one of my biggest gripes with the project so far has been not the React Native project, but what it's done to the rest of the ecosystem in terms of fragmenting between, around 4 different versions. I'm really happy with this 2-week release cycle now, because it'll give those repos some time to catch up before, having to make some other drastic changes. Those changes aren't happening as often as they used to, but I could only imagine if it's tough on the user of those frameworks, I could only imagine what it's like for the authors of those open source projects as well.
Well, this problem actually compounds as well if you consider the fact that the platforms underneath here, for anybody who's writing native code, is also changing. But, Android not as often. Apple, you're getting iOS updates once a year. But sometimes that's also a breaking change as well. So the more, people in the room, the more that we're actually having to like take care of everything and everybody. So I think that there's some discussions on how to, this is working from like the middle to, more and more it's radiating out. People are very open to ideas on how we can quickly spread and help and fix those things. Because you're talking about React Native, then React Native dependent, components and libraries, then React Native dependent components and libraries that work on native code, right? And then at that layer, it's almost it's very difficult to identify these things. So I think better errors, better testing, better upgrading paths. And I know they're doing that in 40. And React Native 40, they're doing Git involved merges rather than using Yeoman. But, it's like we're always trying to figure out how to get this. But as it gets bigger, it's also like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the right answer is if anybody actually has it.
Are you talking about the upgrade process as far as upgrading from like 38 to 39 to 40? Is that what you're talking about with the Git?
Yeah.
As far as Yeoman? Okay.
Yeah, they got the new system dropping in 40, and they have you can get early access to it by installing a global as of right now. But as far as how all this will work, let's all hold hands and let's hope it does, because it's difficult, right? I mean, it's such a relief to know that even as getting a learning book, like that's where the problem starts.
I guess you could say it's a relief. I think it's also honestly points to how difficult the problem is, right? If even your Hello World can't remain up to date really easily, then maintaining a production app becomes much more difficult. And I think that any system that requires coordination between all of these different players, like you said, whoever's maintaining React Native Core versus a library for it versus a library with native code, anything that requires on heavy coordination between all of those people is just going to be difficult. I think what I've seen most people do if they're using React Native in production is that they just sort of resign themselves to using a slightly out-of-date version, and then they plan every couple months, say, or whenever they desperately need a new feature from the release, then they plan to do the work of upgrading everything.
Yeah, that's basically been our way of upgrading, though I would like to get into the process of upgrading, every 2 weeks or something like that, but we just haven't done it. We wait until, like you just exactly said, we have a few features that we really need, or just we have the time, and then we'll spend the time and upgrade like 3, 4, 5, 6 versions, just depending on where we are. So
that reminds me, I have a project I have to bring up about 4 or 5 versions. Thanks for that reminder. I know what I'm doing today.
Before, I think we've kind of, I don't know, I feel like we've covered quite a bit. Is there anything else that you feel like we could talk about that we haven't really gone over, Bonnie?
I don't know. There are, obviously a whole lot of things we could talk about. I know y'all are doing React Native and thinking about it pretty constantly. So what are the problems that for you right now are the most interesting ones?
I'd say that ideally it's sort of, we always kind of touch on the key points. They're said very often, third-party components for common things. Immediately people think of Navigator. Handling how is this going to work, or where can this knowledge go? Can we expand that? Can we bring the horizon? Can we land on Mars, right? That's platforms and being able to take your knowledge from building one app to building it for someone else's computer somewhere else that you wouldn't have had access to, or not the serious core knowledge to do so. And then I think that ultimately also right now, the funny problem that we're trying to all figure out that's sort of difficult is what is a good way to treat this open source, monster, right? Because if you take a look, the tickets are extremely high on that issue, breaking changes, communication. So one of the things that I really like is, first of all, I love this podcast, right? It allows us to get a little sneak peek into what's really going on. And communication, I think, is the next beast that we need to slay. Is like we need to identify who's working with it and what who's got the big picture ideas, as well as you might notice Hector Ramos is starting to do blog posts from inside of Facebook and posting roadmaps. And as much as we all love big unveilings and surprises, that's attractive to go to something new. It's not so fantastic when you're sitting in the dark the whole time waiting for something you're already working on. So I think that them stepping up communication is probably the biggest key. Who's using this? Who's having this problem before? Because, I mean, I'm sure it's a little disheartening when you're the only person with a particular question. The only thing more disheartening is probably when you're the 1,000th person with that same question. So I think that communications, honestly, like where we're really kind of evolving into, and I don't know if there's a lot of precedence in other projects for, I wouldn't actually know what to compare it to as far as like a lot of people. I mean, you could say other frameworks, but for instance, if you said Rails, right? I just heard a bunch of JavaScript developers scream. Like that's not something that Node developers have usually had a lot of experience with. That's a small subset, or it's a currently changing subset is going to be people who knew Rails that are going to Node, but not so many people who chose Node over Rails. So, and then the lessons that were learned were, these are 2010, 2011, heyday Rails lessons. I mean, do they apply now? So, I don't know. Maybe big companies like Twitter and Microsoft have these answers already figured out. But as far as like a community, we need these answers. So that's probably the biggest difficulty in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really well put. And I'm super interested to see how that all plays out. I think definitely one of the hardest parts for onboarding people to React Native, because, I deal with a lot with beginners who are trying to get to grips on this framework, is this feeling that, if I actually don't want to get blindsided by changes, I have to keep up with blog posts and a Discord forum and these podcasts and Twitter and all this other stuff. And it's interesting thinking about trying to balance an open source community with all of these different avenues for, discussion and announcements and all of that. There's just so much of it. Yeah, I'm also really not sure which projects to look to see good examples of sort of community management around that kind of thing.
Wow, that's such an eye-opening point that the new people coming in do look at all of this. And it is kind of crazy. Like you said, there's just so many places to get this information that I guess it is overwhelming. I guess we're just kind of used to it, but I could totally see how that would be very intimidating, because not only do you need to learn, what it is that React Native is and how to build applications in it, but knowing where to get all this information, and that there isn't a single place that you can kind of go to get all this information, that you even have to worry about all these other things. That's super interesting to kind of hear that coming from someone that's worked with a lot of new people.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, for example, podcasts like this are really awesome, but to pitch to someone who only has, say, 10 hours a week to devote to this, you should spend an hour listening to this podcast, or you should spend an hour reading these blogs every week. It becomes really difficult if you're not already paying attention to the community to know who you should be listening to, or even how to find all of these awesome resources. And it's sort of the problem of having too many great things. But, that's also the wonderful diversity that we've got in the React Native ecosystem right now, is that there are so many people publishing interesting work.
I wonder what might be the answer to that problem. Like what someone listening, maybe I'll be able to do, or maybe something we can do, or someone somewhere can kind of put together a resource that can kind of, put all these things together and kind of have like a single place to kind of get their information about React Native. I think just be interesting to hear about.
I think the most natural place for that is the React Native docs and release notes themselves, because that's the one place that if you're using this framework, you're not going to be able to avoid. And I think actually, for example, the release notes have improved a lot when it comes to giving people heads up and announcements of, we're moving away from this, or you should be prepared in the next 2 versions that we're going to deprecate that. And then the awesome thing is that then the deluge of information from other sources becomes stuff that you pursue when you're really interested in it, when you're trying to figure out, when you're actually trying to gather more information about how people are using it, when you're trying to look up, oh, I think I have this kind of challenge. What do other people say about it? And then it becomes optional instead of feeling like, oh God, if I miss out on keeping up with the community, then I'm going to get blindsided by a change.
Yeah, that doesn't help anybody sleep at night. I took a 2-week vacation. I came back and I had to relearn React Native. That was a terrible idea.
So you were asking about what we kind of thought were the interesting things going on or some of the interesting problems being solved right now. I think there's a few things for me. One of them is kind of seeing how the React Native project has spurred, or maybe similar projects were brought on either at the same time or maybe influenced by React Native, like NativeScript with Angular 2. And then there's people spinning off things off of React Native. I believe Cycle Native at one point was being discussed and some of these other things. I think it'll be interesting if someone does something with Vue in the future, or if anyone's already working on that. I'm not really sure. Also, so React Native to me it's not 100% mature. We were just talking about all the breaking changes and the things that happened, but just recently building a new app for our company, and when we put it into production, we ran into just so few roadblocks that stopped us from iterating quickly and getting our app out there. It was just such a nice experience. I'm not saying that all the problems are solved, because they're not, but I believe we're to a point where the major problems have been solved, and now we're kind of iterating on those problems, and there's a few things that are being worked on. But I believe, to me, the more interesting things are projects like Exponent that are giving people access to build React Native apps, more ease of just getting in and learning without having to worry about some of the underlying issues or platforms like Xcode. And just everyone that I've seen use Exponent has been able to pick things up quicker, and then they're able to, release through Exponent. I think that's really awesome. And then maybe some of the other platforms that are being targeted, like we talked about Windows, but even being able to build and release to TVs and watches and all these other platforms. I think it's just super interesting to kind of see all that progress, and all of the awesome people that are actually taking time out of their day to build these things and, just put them out there for everyone to use.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think it is so great to see how far React Native has come. And it is absolutely like you can actually get started and make an app and then, ship it to production. And the roadblocks are very, very few. I'm really looking forward to the day where I can be like, I have a free Saturday, so I guess I'm going to build a watch app. I've never built a watch app before, and then bang it out in a day, right? Like, I think we're basically at that point.
Heck yeah.
And it's really, really great to see.
Yeah, I think hackathons everywhere are going to have to step up their game.
Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Bonnie, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, so mine is actually not related to React Native, but it's called Cheap Bots Done Quick, which is a site that makes it really simple to write your own Twitter bots using a tracery, which is like this sort of JSON grammar. I like it a lot. I've been playing around with Twitter bots lately because I think it's a really cool interaction pattern. So there's that. And then there's also, I forgot the name of it. I think it's Fog Creek's new product, GoMix. It was formerly known as HyperDev. And it's basically an in-browser coding environment, like really simple, get started quick, except you can host HTML and CSS and JavaScript, so you can actually run a server out of it. And it's mostly for, I would use it for prototyping or education or whatever, but if you're running a Twitter bot, it means you no longer need to set up a Heroku sleep timer to turn your thing off every 8 hours or whatever. So for me, that's been my side project interest right now.
Very cool. Gant, do you have any picks?
Yeah, recently I work with our local genius at Infinite Red, Steve Kellogg, who we'll never be able to get him on the podcast, but if you could get a meeting with him, it's awesome. And he was working on something we're planning on releasing soon that'll be part of Ignite. I told Nader a little bit about it, but you guys will see it soon. And as he's working on it, he was trying to evaluate what the dependencies should be, and he had never seen it before. So I suggested to him Sid Harth's cost of modules. So what happens is it's a global NPM install. you type cost of modules inside of a project, and then it just tells you what kind of which modules. It gives you a scoreboard of exactly how much you're costing in dependencies. And it's probably the worst thing I could have shown him. He after I showed it to him, he ran the cost of modules religiously and has ripped out some of the other modules to replace them with thinner, like way smaller. And you'd be surprised. I mean, you bring something in to your library, it might have all the functionality that you want, but the size of that actual module might be huge. I mean, it is no guarantee that they've done a good job of pruning it down and optimizing it. I mean, even if it runs quickly, but then there's usually somebody else out there who kind of came along and made a thinner version that would have worked better. So it's a GitHub. I think it's really easy to type, really easy to do. If you're ever going to be an author of a particular library, do yourself and everybody a favor. Install cost of modules. It's kebab case cost of modules with the hyphens. And run that command if you can, just to make sure that you're not doubling the size of your library just to go ahead and get a small piece of functionality out there.
That sounds really great. And
dangerous. Because then you start typing it on everything and start investigating them.
It's a good rabbit hole.
Okay, so my pick today is a book. It's called The Joy of Game Theory, An Introduction to Strategic Thinking by Presh Talwalkar. Someone I know just recommended this book a while back, and I had it on my to-read list, and I just started it, and I'm about a quarter of the way through it. And it's really interesting, and game theory is kind of a complex subject, and I think they break it down for someone like me who doesn't really know or understand it yet. And I really am enjoying it. So I would check that out if you're looking for a pretty good read. Okay, well, that wraps it up. And again, Bonnie Eisenman, Learning React Native, Building Native Mobile Apps with JavaScript is the book from O'Reilly. I highly recommend it if you're looking to learn React Native. Like I said, it was one of the first books that I picked up and the first resources, and it really helped me kind of get up to speed very quickly. So Bonnie, thanks for coming on our show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
All right, that wraps up episode 49 of React Native Radio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.